I'm glad to see Dylan and your new cohort is part of the shit about Star Trek.
Yes, definitely.
Are you ready?
Well, actually, Eric wrote the last Jeopardy because he pre-wrote all the questions, so there wasn't room for a Star Trek.
One of them. Okay. I actually ran into that back at
We've learned enough here.
But I got to do
I'm finishing my intro.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
That's all wait for Twitter.
You're gonna stand up with me. Nah.
Yeah, he said he's just
Taking the day off.
crazy with that.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you very much for your patience. We got a couple of glitches on the setup. Thanks everybody who got their growlers and filled them up. We have some extra growlers here if you can't wait and want to fill up your own. Feel free to take one. Thank you very much for Damon for coming out. Can we do anything else?
Don't clap. You don't know if it's going to suck yet.
Oh yeah, we are live on Google Hangouts, so watch your fucking language. And outside of that, I didn't say it was a rated PG or whatever. So, all right, thanks, Damon. Go for it.
How's it going?
Awesome.
All right, cool. So, do you want to talk about Node.js? Node.js is kind of still a big buzzword right now. If you're on one of the coasts, it's like that and Go are kind of the big things that people are doing. Sort of inward. There's some moderate pickup. I know that in the last year that I've been working on it, 2 years really, I've seen a lot more traction in Albuquerque, which is encouraging to see. There are more local companies getting involved with Node. I actually did a talk on Node a year and a quarter ago, something like that. And I kind of focused on some of the whiz bang stuff around oh, Node, check it out. It's a web server and you can also do the socket.io stuff. And that was cool and all, but one of the questions I actually got from a lot of people was okay, well, what about normal web pages or, just the 15-minute blog? I was so excited to show how to do real-time chat that I didn't really go over how Node is actually perfectly acceptable. Well, Node with Express are perfectly acceptable for, building a website, whether it's a simple 15-minute blog or if it's, a full-feature website. At uber.com, or I'm sorry, riders.uber.com, which is a software developer for Uber, runs completely on Node, as well as actually uber.com itself is also on Node Express. So we do have a lot of properties at Uber that work on that, that work with that. So like I said, kind of jumping the gun there, web applications developer for Uber. I've been doing that for a little over 2 years. Before that, I started off college doing Java stuff and then learned PHP and then learned Cold Fusion, then went back to Java, then moved over to Ruby on Rails, did a little bit of PHP stuff in each stop of the way. But for pretty much the last 2 years, I've been focused just primarily on kind of new JavaScript, which, has kind of been a bad word for a while. Then it was really cool. And jQuery came along and it was oh my God, JavaScript's amazing. And then got all the bloat that anything that's been out there for a long time has had, and a lot of the community that I see is actually moving away from jQuery and into sort of the do one thing, well type micro libraries. Right now, I'm kind of splitting my time between Express.js stuff for backend services and React.js, which is a Facebook it's what Facebook uses for its web interface. Where we've kind of migrated from doing Backbone.js to React.js. And it's been pretty exciting. I hope at some point to get up here again and talk about the kind of the front end stuff, or the client side rendered, so browser rendered web applications work. Today, we're going to kind of go into essentially just that 15-minute blog tutorial, but it's going to take us a lot longer than 15 minutes because it takes everyone longer than 15 minutes unless you just copy and paste everything in. And like I said, at Uber, we have a lot of our, we sort of split our stuff between, we got a lot of Python, we're getting a lot of backend services that we're writing in Go, and then our real-time system that deals with dispatch is all, bare bones Node stuff. And then we have a lot of our web, kind of our web stuff is mixed between server-side rendered Express.js and client-side rendered. Like I said, there's still some Backbone, but we're getting to a lot more React stuff for our client-side rendered stuff. And then, of course, Android and iOS and Windows Phone, I think, and there might be a BlackBerry app out there somewhere, because we do have people in like DC and Seattle. Anyway, so Node, and I just ripped this straight from their website. It's a platform built on Chrome's JavaScript runtime for easy building fast, scalable network applications. Uses event-driven, non-blocking I/O model, lightweight, and I'm not just going to read the slide, but essentially you can go to Node.js and you know, this is what it's going to tell you.
Is that Comic Sans?
Yes, it is. I did that for all of my designer friends out there.
So nice.
The default is actually Arial, and I changed it. Because I'm an engineer. So anyway, I know the first time I saw this, it's like I got Node and I figured out how to get installed, and I was like, okay, now what? And you know, that was probably about 3 years ago, and I don't even think the description was as good as that. But you know, kind of the two things I wanted to pull out of that are event-driven, and you know, that essentially just means that with Node, everything is based around setting up event listeners, and whether that's just like, hey, you've got an HTTP request coming in, and so I'm going to create a listener for any HTTP request that comes in, or a TCP packet, a WebSocket. You know, people do stuff with I'm going to mispronounce this, but the Arduino, Arduino, yeah. People do a lot of stuff with that. You know, building little event servers for the Arduino, whatever. I don't do it, obviously, but yeah, it's essentially just setting up these event listeners, and then when the event happens, you know, do the things and win the points. You know, whatever that is. And non-blocking I/O. I did a terrible graphic a year and a half ago. This one I think is a little bit better, but I'm still using Comic Sans and an engineer. But the idea is that you know, during a normal web request, you've got sort of like, okay, you come in and you've got to do essentially four things. You're going to insert something into the database. You're going to write some log somewhere, just to say that you actually did it. Or you had a request come in, maybe something like statsd. You maybe need to send an email like, hey, your account was successfully created, whatever it is, and then you have to send a response. Now, using non-asynchronous or sort of blocking I/O type languages and frameworks, you basically have to go, you start and you do number 1, and then you do number 2, and then 3, and then you finally get to 4, and you send your response, and you're done. But that can be slow, not terribly slow, hopefully, but if you've got to do a DB insert and sending an email, I mean, those two things can take some time. And other languages will do stuff like just do background jobs, and so it'll actually put it into a different system. So if you've ever done like Ruby on Rails, they've got their whole, what's it called? Can't remember. It's like Celery for Python, and I don't know. There's all these like job systems where you basically just you're still doing a synchronous write to a job system, but that's faster than sending an email or doing a log file or something like that. And with non-blocking, you basically you can come in and you can say, I'm going to insert the DB, and then when that's done, I'm going to write the response. But then, like out of sync, I'm also just going to write a log and I'm going to send an email. And you can develop highly complex and confusing callback structures. To basically say, when this is done and that's done and this is done, then do this. But if this fails, do something else. And again, it's all these sort of events, but you can sort of line these things up. Questions on that stuff so far? It's a little abstract. We'll get into it in the code. Hopefully, it'll make it a little bit easier. And I'm going to show you like Node, just raw Node at first. And it's kind of it's kind of verbose. It's like you get it and you do hello world, and it's like if you actually start trying to develop any sort of sizable application, you've got a lot of boilerplate code that you have to put in there. And instead of writing your own framework, the good folks at Express.js have written a fast, unopinionated, minimalist framework for Node that does a lot of good things around web applications, whether it's tying into a web socket so that you can do real-time interaction with the browser, or just a simple CRUD MVC style application, again, the 15-minute blog, which is what we're going to go through. Express in particular is basically just, it's middleware. Everything is middleware. And you'll start seeing this pattern as we start building this up. And it's essentially just, you have functions, and each function gets the request that came in. It gets the response that will eventually trigger something going off. And then, as we build these up, these also the middlewares, you can have multiple middlewares happen. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but you can basically just sort of chain all these events that happen together. And, each one, it can either interrupt the flow or it can just pass on to the next item. And that is the extent of the slides I did. So, who here has worked at all with NPM? Okay, we got about half of the audience. So I'll go into this. NPM is the Node package manager, and if you've ever used like a Linux system, Red Hat had RPM and Yum and all these different things. It's basically just a command line interface for installing things. And then the other thing that an NPM does is it'll create this package.js. I'm just gonna you can see it basically just creates this JSON file with some basic information about your application. And then if I do install Express, it's going to actually go out and get Express and then look at what Express needs to run, and it'll get all those packages, and then it sort of walks down the tree so that you basically at the end of this get Express, and then you'll see, oh wait, you basically add things to that file so that when so you don't check that stuff into a repository. You actually block it so that when the next person downloads it, and I'll encourage you guys to check out the project that we have at the end here. You just do npm install on any of the steps, and it will go to that file and say, okay, what do I have, what do I don't have, and install all of your dependencies. It's not a perfect system. No one's made a perfect package management system, but it actually works pretty well for our purposes. And that's really all npm is. So I'm going to kind of gloss over. I will touch on the packages that I've downloaded, but basically this is all just via that npm install. Okay, so in the beginning, there was nothing. Oh, geez, except for really small text. How's that?
What program is this?
This is Atom, which is the GitHub. Yeah, GitHub's text editor. I've been using it since basically it went public, and I no longer miss Sublime, and I never got. What's that?
Is it free?
Yeah. Yeah, I never got good enough at Vim or Emacs, so I'm but yeah. So anyway, here's our npm file. There's not a whole lot to it. Basically just details what the name and what your version number is. Gives you this, the ability to list a different, some scripts, and we won't go into that. And the repository, and this is just sort of basic meta information, so that if I was developing something for the public, it would go out. But there's not a whole lot here, and so we're gonna switch over to my Hello World branch, and even here where there's not really much. I basically have an index file now. It's all I've added. And this follows the, there's what's called the CommonJS file format. And it's just a way of building your JavaScript in terms of modules, as opposed to just scripts that you load in and then pollute the global space and have collisions and things disappear, things overwrite each other. So the idea is that the modules should be completely self-contained. Anything in, so most programming languages that are compiled, use something like this. If you're using Java, you have import statements, and actually ES6 goes to import statements over this require. But basically, I'm going to pull in the HTTP library, and I'm going to create a server. And you see that server, remember that middleware that I showed you where I had request and response? This one I'm actually not going to provide a next for, but I'm just going to write a header that says, we're a 200 OK, and our content type is text. And then the response, I'm just going to end with hello world. Now, if I go over here and go node index, server running, and if I go here, hello, geez, you probably can't see that at all. Believe me, it says hello world. All right, we're done. So anyway, but that's really not that interesting. And you can kind of see how, there's a lot of verbosity here. It's like, so I have to set my header every single time. And when you actually get into like reading, the body that came in, it can get pretty verbose pretty fast. Enter. Express. Now what we've done is you're going to see here, it shouldn't be dependencies, but you're going to see that we have this extra block here. And this was, I just typed in npm install express with a save flag, and it did that download that you guys saw, but then it also entered a line here so that from here on out, anyone that installs this will get Express. And you see there's like the versioning number there, and that's just sort of to make sure that you're not getting version 2 or version 8. And there's some stuff around semvar that's beyond the scope of this, but just trust me that we're going to get at a minimum 4.13.3 from that. And anytime I check that out and just hit npm install, I don't have to look at this list. I can just hit npm install. And our index file gets a little bit slimmer. So you see here, once again, I'm just doing an import, this time for Express. I'm going to set up a new application, which is just calling Express as a function. So what happens is that when we require when we require Express, it returns a function. And then Express is that function, we call it, and that then returns this application object. And then we have these really nice things. We just have app get. And we have, again, our response here. We're just going to say response send hello world. And that's it. This down here is just this is just how we set it up. We basically, tell the app to listen on 3000. And, really, that's all you really need. This other stuff is just sort of like, hey, once it's running, do this other stuff. And so I just have some pretty printing to the console. Which actually I realized the port doesn't come through. But when we see, whoop,
Yay, live demos.
it helps when you save the, there we go. Okay. Now, you can see that it changed fonts, and somehow, somewhere, it's now sending a different application type. Actually, it sends HTML as opposed to text, and so that's why the browser changes. But it's still pretty boring. We still just have hello world. So I want to add a little bit more. And so I'm going to install this Jade package. And Jade is essentially a templating engine. So the other thing that can get really ugly is if you just have a bunch of HTML that you're piling into your index file. Obviously, if you have full HTML pages and you're doing request response and then HTML head title, so on and so forth, you're going to have a lot of junk. templating engines allow you to basically move that junk into templates, and there are a bunch of different things out there. I mean, there's like handlebars is a pretty popular one, and that just looks like JavaScript with these curly brackets, double curly brackets that indicate you're going to do either a control or a variable of some sort. I like Jade, and this is kind of a curveball, but I threw it a year and a half ago, and people didn't get too freaked out. But anyway, I want to go over the changes here. So right here, you'll see that I just basically, so I've got that application object, and I'm going to set the view engine to Jade, and then I'm just going to set the view directory to views. And then down here, instead of doing that just response or response end or whatever it was, I'm going to tell it to render, and I just tell it index, and then it knows to go out and look in the views folder for something called index.jade. That's the only change there, and we now have in views we have something called index.jade, which has some really funky stuff here, but the basics are I want an HTML template for it, right? And I don't want to keep repeating that on every single page. And so I have my default template. Now you'll notice here that we don't have angle brackets anymore, and we don't have closing tags. What Jade does is it allows you to use the indent to basically close and open tags. And so we have HTML, and indented from that is our header and our body. Indented from header is the title, and then we have a link out to Bootstrap just to make it look less ugly. And we have our body, and then you see there's that dot container. Well, dot container isn't a tag. You can't do angle bracket dot container. Well, what Jade does that's really cool is it just sort of assumes that if you're going to have like a CSS looking thing, like a hashtag container or a dot container, it's going to say, well, you didn't attach that to anything, so I'm just going to assume it's a div. And that's a pretty good assumption because the web is built of divs.
Can Jade make some semantic tags out of that, though?
Sure, yeah. So it's like, and we'll get into this a little bit later, not necessarily with the semantic stuff, but with Bootstrap.
Yeah.
How many people here have used Bootstrap before? Okay, good. So you're going to see, like, even on the next, thing, in the next file here, you're going to see some bootstrappy things start coming in, and so just you'll see it coming. Can you see it right there? Are you?
Yeah, maybe kind of just a little bit. Yeah.
I'll try not
Just
to.
a tiny rotation makes a big difference to us here.
Okay.
That's
All right.
But we don't want to drown out the other side of the room.
Yeah, I was gonna say thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Now you can't see it straight on.
Side of the room, is that okay?
Yeah, well, you gotta ask these guys.
Yeah, actually, I'm more concerned about them.
Yeah. I want to make sure we didn't run out people.
All right. And then at the bottom, I've just got some scripts. I'm just going out to CDN to pull in jQuery and Bootstrap's JavaScript stuff, even though we don't end up using any of that. So this is a file called layouts default. And you see here, I've got this extends layouts default. In layouts default, I've got block content. Here, I've got this block content, right? And there's nothing underneath it. Now in this file, I have block content and I have something underneath it. So I'm basically pushing that stuff into content and then spitting it out on the, in our template. And you'll see here Jumbotron, which is a Bootstrap thing, and a hello world, and then a message. Now the message, you see, is actually a function. So we've got this equal sign. Well, the other thing I did in this render function is I actually passed in JSON with one key, message. Says pretty cool, huh? Now, still not great for our designer friends, but as an engineer, I'm pretty happy. It's like, hey, look at that. I didn't have to write a line of CSS. And we've got our hello world header, and we've got our, this is pretty cool, huh? But that actually came through from our JavaScript. So hopefully you're starting to pick up on some of the power that we're picking up here. But it's still just a hello world app. So, you know, if we're going to have like a really basic web application, it's going to have like a home page and maybe an about page and a contact page. And so I'm going to build those out, but I'm also going to use the MVC pattern for it, or a modified MVC. Who here knows MVC, or knows what I mean when I say MVC? Okay, not 100%. So MVC is, it stands for Model View Controller. And it's basically a way of organizing your code, your logic, into these sort of like separation of concerns. And you have code that is based around the model. And a model is like, what are you displaying? And, you know, so it's like if when we get down the road here, we're going to have, you know, blog posts. And so like a model is like, how do we access blog posts? The controller is like, basically says, I just got a request in for something. Do I have a response for that? And you know, it'll say, hey, model, go get me the data for this. And then it will actually handle pulling into views and sending the information out. And the view, in this case, views and templates are synonymous. It's basically just a view is that JADE file that is the crap that I'm going to spit out. Now we have this next block here. This is the only, well, there's two changes. One was actually adding Express static. So this is just another thing. Express is really unopinionated. You saw that in their intro. And what that means is it doesn't give you a whole lot. It gives you access to a whole lot. And so it doesn't even have like a default, like where are my static files? And so if you want to have like a static CSS file, you actually have to say, okay, I'm going to create a folder. It's going to be called public, and I'm going to put my CSS files there. And then Express has a static method, which basically just says, when I get a request that doesn't look like one of the routes that I know about, see if it's over there, you know, try and find it in public, and if not, throw a 404. And then just app use is just a way of sort of like pulling that into our application logic that we then use for that for the server later on. But then I have this import controllers. Now this is sloppy, and if anyone actually works in JavaScript a lot, I know that like my requires should be up at the top, and we'll get there eventually. But basically, I'm going to require a pages controller, and I'm just going to tell the application to use it. But the one catch is I'm actually going to pass in some the application itself, just for reference. Remember, each one of these files has no idea, shouldn't have any idea about anything that isn't passed into it. And now in our controller file, we've got a pages controller. Once again, it's like I require Express, and I required it on the last page, and I required it on this one. The module stuff, I don't get access to that unless I'm actually passing that along. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this module exports. And this is just sort of a common JS way of saying, when someone uses require on this file, what do I give them? And in this case, I'm giving them a function. And that function expects one parameter, which is app. Now you see back here, we get pages controller. That's the function that we return. And then we're going to pass in app. And then you'll see here that I've got a number of these GET calls. So I'm going to create an Express router. And this is just, again, a way to sort of encapsulate the router information and the controller information together. When we get further down the line, you'll see I'll do this on the second controller. And there's some debate in the community. Some people say you must have controllers that know nothing about routers and then have one router file that it pulls in all your controllers and sets them to routes. And again, Express doesn't care. You build it how you want, and then you guys can bike shed about it with your team. But we have router get. We have the root path, and again this is everything that you've just seen. But then I'm going to add a second one, which is about, and I'm going to set the title on this to about, and then I'm going to have a contact, and I'm going to set the title to contact. And so you really can't see this, and I don't know how to make it bigger, but in that views folder, I now have an about page. Same thing as the index. We've got extends layout default, block content, and then I have just a bunch of essentially HTML. This is essentially just pulled straight off of the ABQ Web Geeks page for this demo, but turned into Jade. And then the other thing to call out here is my title logic. I now basically say This is sort of a shorthand for if, then, else. If we have a title, do title plus a colon, else just do nothing. And I'll show you over here. Oh, that's why. I was like, why is it so huge? Okay, so I'm still going to keep it at 200%. Hopefully that's viewable enough. You know, I added some stuff up here. This isn't really a Backbone demo, so you're just going to have to trust me that I added some stuff to a list and Backbone made it look pretty. And we've got our root file, we've got our about file, and you see up here the well, you can't really see it, but you know that's the about path, and that matches what we had here. And you can't really see it, but it actually changed the title too. It says about colon and then the rest of the title. And same thing with contact. So, you know, playing around with Bootstrap there. But this is all just basically static content, which is fine. And you know, we now have a web page that works. But moving right along, should I actually, before we get too far along, questions, comments?
I was thinking it might be worth noting that Express has its own template. No? What's EJS?
EJS is another templating engine.
Oh, okay. I thought that was Express.
You know, it actually, you're kind of right. Back at like Express 1, they had their own built-in templating language. And then Express 2, or I think it was at 2 or 3, they were like, you know, everyone's like, EJS is garbage. Marked or handlebars and Jade are where it's at, and so they introduced the ability to switch that out. And then actually, when they moved to Express 4, you know, they really sort of took up this you know, small, like one thing only, where they basically said, okay, Express is going to be, you know, the framework that you add all these things to, and you want to use EJS, well, you install EJS and set that in your view engine. If you want to use handlebars, you set that. You want to write your own, you can write your own and set that. I know that there's like a CoffeeScript to HTML library out there that you know, you can do whatever you want. So yeah, I'm sorry, you're not entirely wrong or entirely right. You're sort of in between. I don't even know where, like, who owns that repo anymore, but yeah, I mean, that's sort of the thing, is they spun off everything, and you'll see this later where I actually have to include other libraries to do, like, a request comes in, well, I want to look at the body. Well, Express doesn't do that, but there's a library for that. Or I want to, you know, we'll get to that later. Anything else? Okay. All right. So now we're going to get this. You know, it's been sort of like small incremental changes, and then this is kind of going to be like a big whammy. But we're going to build a posts MVC. Except for that, the M is really just going to be like a fixture file and in-memory storage. So every time the server gets rebooted, it actually just goes back to what our fixture file is. But I'll kind of cover that briefly. Again, okay, let's see, do I add anything? Oh, yeah. So you'll see here, oh, this is what I was just talking about. Well, if I want to look at what's coming in the body, I have no way of doing that. I mean, you could dig into the request itself, or there's a library that makes it really easy that just takes, you know, that takes the raw request and pulls out the body and sets it as request.body. And I think that was the only thing that I installed for this step. Lodash is just it's a cheat library, but it makes when you don't have ES6, it gives you access to a lot of JavaScript functions that don't exist on, like, arrays and objects. And so you're going to see here, this is the first middleware, body parser. And again, we're using that app use syntax. And body parser is included up here. And I'm just going to say body parser. One of the methods, you can basically say a bunch of things. You can say, hey, I might be getting JSON, and you can basically tell it to use that. You can additionally tell it, hey, I might also get URL encoded data. And so that's what we're doing here is I might get URL encoded data. If you see something you think's like that, add it to the body. The second thing that we did, and I actually didn't, I didn't save this one, but is method override. I'm going to come back to that one. But just trust me that what we've done here is we've added 2 middlewares, one for body parsing and one for overriding the HTTP verb. And now we have two controllers. We have our pages controller and our app controller. And this is another, actually even uglier way to do it, where I'm just requiring it directly and invoking that method immediately with the app. So now we have a posts controller. And who here is familiar with like the general like RESTful style of formatting applications? Okay, so HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, has a number of verbs. Almost everyone knows GET. You go to Google and you pull up Google, and that's a GET request. You just said, hey Google, I want to get your page. And a lot of people know POST, which is I'm typing an email, I hit send, and it sends it somewhere, and something picks it up and sends it to someone else, and so basically that was where I sent data from my browser to the server, and the server did something with that. There are actually 3 more verbs. There's put, and the only difference between post and put is in like RESTful interfaces, post is basically, hey, this is something new. You haven't seen this before. Add it as a new item. Put is, hey, I've already got this data. You've already got this data in your system, but I've made some modifications to it, and I'm sending it back to you. And so that's sort of the difference between like creating a blog post and editing it. Yeah. So there's also patch, which isn't as well known, which is actually like, hey, you've already got this data, and I'm going to send you an incomplete piece, and I want you to just patch what you have with the incomplete thing that I have. And then there's delete, which should be pretty obvious, and options, which is really for lower level stuff.
You forgot head.
And head, thank you. Yes. So yeah, there's some of them that you really like, unless you're really doing crazy stuff, you won't ever touch. But get, post, put, and delete are the main ones. And then there's a concept called CRUD. Who's familiar with CRUD? Okay, CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. And so that's basically the things that you'd want to do to a piece of data. You might want to create it, you want to read it, you want to update it, and you want to delete it. And so when you merge those two together in a controller, in an MVC, you basically have stuff like index, new, create, edit, update, and destroy. And you'll see here that this syntax is pretty similar. We have router.get, but this time I'm telling it, I would go to posts, I want you to run this function. We've got a request and a response, and all we're going to do is we're going to render posts.index. But now here, instead of message, I've got this posts, and I tell it posts all. Well, all we have here is I have where did it? Might have deleted something I might not want. It's a live demo. We'll see how it goes. I have this dummy posts here, which again, module exports. And in this case, I say, when I require this file, I want you to just return an array that has these objects in it. I just pulled some ipsums. And so I actually know so now I'm just going to require that file, and now, oh no, that's why, never mind. I made a late change on this. So anyway, That's right, because I've got this posts model, which we'll get to in a second. So I've got a posts all, which gives me all the data. I've got a new, which is basically just like a blank form. I have a create, which will create the post. An edit, which will basically say, go get me a post based on this ID, and render an edit function or an edit template, and the put. So remember, put was that like I've got something and I want to update it. Same thing. Go find it, but then replace it with the new body and destroy. So just threw sort of a lot at you, but essentially all we're doing is we're doing CRUD and REST. CRUD is what we're doing to the data, and REST is how we're doing it. We're doing gets and posts and puts and deletes, and then we're also we're using this model for our CRUD stuff. So this, and I'll go through the views here in a second, but questions? Is it really, I know this is kind of confusing right now, and I'm hoping to pull it together in a second. So, so anyway, up here I've got this posts model, and I've got a file called posts. And here's where I actually required my dummy posts. And so that's that file that has the like bacon ipsum and hipster ipsum. And then I have a good.
I was just joking with my students. No Star Trek episode? Resistance is futile.
You know, I went online and I just picked like the first three that came up for humorous ipsum. So anyway, I'm basically we're turning this function that has an all, it has a create, it has a get, an update, and a destroy. This again matches up with we've got posts all, posts create, posts update, and posts destroy. Get that sort of mapping? And then in this file, all I'm doing is I load in this essentially dummy JSON, and I'm using some Lodash functions. So I want to like sort by order so that we have the newest one first. Here I'm literally just pushing it onto the array. Here I'm finding a post where the post ID matches. This one I'm doing the same thing essentially. I'm just replacing that content. And here I'm actually just removing it from our dummy posts. And the views, so we've got an index. Looks pretty similar at the top, right? We've got layouts default. We've got our block content. We've got this, you know, so this is where we're getting some more of the magic Jade with Bootstrap. We've got, you know, ul.nav.navpills.pullRight, which creates a navigation with pills and it floats it to the right. We've got our header. But then we have this, and this is basically how do we loop through posts? Well, we're going to say for posts and posts, we're going to create a div with blog post. I'm going to create some buttons for that. And then I'm going to have a title and content. And that's going to match up with title and content. And so let's pull that up.
When you node index.js, that's on save.
No, that's actually so that I have to save it already. And node index.js is basically just telling the node runtime, start with this file and see where it gets you.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's basically loading that first index file where I require Express, and I create the app, and then I tell the app to use the different middlewares, and then I.
It's funny that you have to redeclare that every time, or is that just because you're in a different Git?
It's a console command. So it's actually, yeah. I guess I'm sort of going through that pretty fast. So I just hit Command C to turn off the server. And you'll see here, now there's nothing there. And then I tell Node index, and so it's basically live, and it will be there until I actually exit out of it. And now we go to blog, and you see we have this nice, pretty blog with the data coming from that dummy file and printed out. And we have 2 items, so we've got 2 of these things. With me so far? Questions? They don't have to be good questions.
Well, they don't have to be good.
Sure.
So the way that you're starting this up, the server, does it spawn a thread for every request coming in? Is it thread safe?
It is not. Node is basically a single thread, single process application server, and it takes advantage of the fact that Node is non-blocking. So again, when these requests come in, if I'm doing a database request, the next tick might be someone else's request, and I mean there's safety within the process itself, but so there's not going to be something leaking from one request to another, but it's not like it's doing multiple threads. It's essentially just going through from top to bottom, and if someone isn't ready, it will move on to the next command, and then when an event happens, like, oh, hey, it's like I made a database request, and then another request comes in, it's like, oh, I can do that really quickly, and then the database request comes back, well, that's a new event, and then I continue with the flow from the previous thing. So, yeah, I mean, and when it comes to the deep in depth, how is Node so incredibly fast with real-time systems? I'm actually not the greatest person to ask, but there's a lot of writing out there about that.
So it's there's one central control thread, and then there are multiple IO worker threads. The IO threads themselves, you don't have to worry about that because your JavaScript, whenever it's running, is broken that single handler. So that's what makes it safe. So you can do some sort of they across IO handlers as they come back and it's a single thread. You don't have to worry about synchronization. It's all just running with a single thread of control as far as your code. When it comes to the IO, you don't have to worry about it. The events will come and get you to get that thread into a callback. So yeah, in some ways you have more threads running, so you get some additional performance from a multi-CPU system like IO component. But as far as your handler,
Exactly. There's always someone who knows a little bit more about that. So again, the Node process itself, single thread, but yeah, these IO connections are low-level C things that are happening. Thank you, by the way. Other questions before I move on? Okay, so obviously we've got a blog. We want to add a new blog post. Well, that was all really fast. So wait, what just happened there? So I hit new post, and it took me to posts new. Now in my controller, you see I've got a response to posts new. Router get posts new. Call this function. We've got a request and a response. And I'm just going to render. And now this posts new actually refers to my view folder. And I can go into view posts new. Looks pretty similar. We've got an extends layout default, block content, a form where I'm setting the method to post and my action to posts. And then I've got this include statement. Well, this sort of flips it on its head. So we've seen extends. Well, include basically just means to pull in partials form. My form group. This is all just pretty basic backbone stuff, bootstrap stuff. But we've got form group. We've got our inputs and a text area and a button that's called submit. Now, when I hit submit, I was doing a post to posts. So post. This is where it went. Now you see that rec body, that was that middleware that we included. And that basically said, hey, when you get a request that comes in, I want you to look at the deep internals of this request and make it easier for me to just grab body out of that. And it actually turns that into a Java object or JavaScript object. So, you can basically say like, rec body title or rec body content or rec body whatever. And, it allows you to access internals like this. And then I've got that posts create, which goes to my model, and post create basically just, it creates the ID by looking at the length of the things we have in that array. Again, don't do this in production. I should have put that at the very beginning of this, but don't do this in production. And I'm just pushing that onto our array, and I'm returning it. And here I'm actually just redirecting back to posts. So I've got.
That doesn't write to that post file that you have the dummy.
No, it doesn't. It's yeah. I'm not writing to it. I'm just doing that. It's just in memory right now, but it was kind of the easiest to go through that concept. And if we've got extra time, we can get into the Mongo stuff, but we'll see.
Do you have someplace to be?
I've got bowling at 9, so beyond that.
It's a busy night for you.
So posts, another post.
Were you just implying that we can do a denial of service attack by creating a new blog post with the same link that would overwrite the previous?
You could do a lot of stuff.
That's why he said don't do it.
Yeah. but I mean, it actually brings up a really cool point, which is that there are libraries out there, and there are middlewares out there that I can include. So I can do there's a really basic one that's just a CSRF, which is cross-site request forgery, and that's one that you can basically just include, and all of a sudden puts a method in your response that you can slap anywhere in your file. So I'd have like an input for CSRF token, and it would have that CSRF token that's tied to my session. There are other ones that can basically do request throttling, and then because it's all middleware, there are actually middlewares that are literally just other middlewares that pass in, and it'll be like hey, these are the 5 libraries. And I think there's one called Helmet, and Helmet is just all it is. It's like 6 other middlewares that you probably want to have on a production server.
Yeah. I have a lot more here. Can we take stateful sessions offline? Because I really love to quiz you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got that. We also have edit. Well, I hit edit and it came back. And how did that happen? Well, we've got our get here for posts, and then here's a little wrinkle. I have this :post ID. Well, what this is doing is I'm not actually saying I want posts :post ID. What I'm saying is posts, and then anything that anything that isn't recognized elsewhere, run it into this function. So like we've got posts new, but other than posts new, anything will come in and it will then try and get something where rec params, and you see post ID matches with post ID here. This is our post model. So we go into post get, and we're just basically going through that array to find the first post that has a match for that post ID. I'm not doing stuff around missing files or anything like that because this is already enough code. And then I'm doing a render, and in this case I'm doing a render on edit. Edit looks pretty familiar. Looks like that new file, except for I'm changing my action. I'm setting this method, which I told you I'd get to in a second, and then I'm including that partials form. And remember that form actually had post title and post content slapped into it. So this, where was it?
Yes, you don't have till 9. Just saying.
I know, yeah. No, I just lost my train of thought there. So anyway, yeah. So that's basically how we create it. Oh, that was the that edit file where we've got this underscore method. So this is sort of a hack because most browsers, unless you're doing Ajax, don't allow you to use anything other than get and post. Well, a lot of times you're like, well, I want to use put, and this allows you to share interfaces between your web and your API or stuff like that. So we've got this underscore method, and I'm actually calling it put. And then this other middleware here, all it's doing is it's basically saying if I've got a rec body and it's an object and underscore method is in that, I'm going to set that to method. I'm going to delete that underscore method. And then I'm going to actually change how this goes through the rest of the flow. So when it gets to my controller, it's no longer a post, it's a put. And so when I hit update, my exclamation points come through. And that's because it came in here, just half a second, it came in here. We had that extra hidden field of underscore method. It changed that from a post to a put, which used this method and ran into posts update where it found the file that I was looking for and replaced the content of it. What's up?
And then Ajax request, which you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if this was Ajax, if I was using like React or Backbone or even just like vanilla JavaScript, I could just basically set post and that's fine. So when you're using JavaScript, you can use all the verbs. It's just that for HTTP or for like browsers and submitting a form from a browser, you can't. Most browsers don't support using the method of put or delete. You have to use either get or post. Yeah, still they're getting there. They're getting there, but it's still if you're going to have anyone using like IE for example, you're not there yet.
I don't consider IE a browser though.
So is that why you have a get rather than a delete method as your?
Yes, exactly. I mean, and there's a hack around that where you can basically make a form that encapsulates a button, and you press that button, and it actually sets the. There are ways around that, but I just was lazy. Trust me. But good. I mean, that's a good catch, though. It is a good catch. And yeah, so if there was more time, I would probably have done that, but that's not really as important. How are we doing? Okay, so actually, I just restarted the server and my posts went away. And again, that's because this file, I'm not updating a file, and I'm basically just reading it into memory, and as long as the server's running, I update that array and everything's fine, but then I restart the server and it goes away. So it's obviously, that is not what you want to do in production. It's not a very scalable or safe way to run anything. And so we have these persistence layers, and a persistence layer is basically another word for saying a database. And a database can be either like an RDBMS like MySQL, SQLite, Oracle, Postgres, whatever, SQL Server. There are all these like SQL versions out there, but kind of one of the newer hotnesses have been these what are called document storage systems. MongoDB is kind of the one that everyone gets really excited about. And since we're keeping on the theme of don't do this in production, I've used MongoDB for this. There's a lot of debate whether or not MongoDB can web scale as the.
Well, wasn't there a huge security flaw just announced with Mongo like a couple weeks ago?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't used Mongo and it's like I haven't used Mongo in like since the last time I was doing a demo or doing a little sample, whatever. I just know that there have been issues with there's this whole concept of like eventually concurrent. So if you have multiple database servers, you've got big issues where sometimes data wasn't getting replicated even though it was promised to be replicated. Things just disappearing, the map reduce functions so that if you ended up with a bunch of documents, the speed that they were promising you just wasn't there. So people still use it, so it can't be all bad. But and if someone's using it in production right now and having a good time with it, like awesome. But I know that like we don't use it, and I don't know many people who do, other than playing with little things like this. Okay, if we have I don't know, I could probably cover it in like 5-6 minutes, or you can just trust me and we can get to mingling.
5 minutes.
Show of hands for 5 minutes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Let's go.
All right, cool. Okay, async and persistent. So this is another kind of big concept, so I'm going to talk quickly. So anyway, I implemented, you know, we have all this stuff, but when everything goes away,
Everything went away.
it's almost as if I planned it. Okay, so now package, you know, down here, I've now got MongoDB and MongoDB core. So MongoDB is basically just the native adapter. There are ORMs out there, but that's another hour subject. I mean, and ORMs are another thing that, you know, some people don't use at all, which is, and there's good arguments for that with big complex systems. So anyway, I've now modified my model, and this model is kind of a hack model. It's not really an ORM model. It's not really a data access model. It's just sort of like a place that I've encapsulated this stuff, and you know, true MVC design would have abstracted this further. But basically, what I have, actually, let me start here, is I require my Mongo client, and then we're going to, this is your first sort of look at some of the asynchronous stuff. So I'm saying Mongo client connect, and this is just localhost on my machine, and then I've got this function at the end. So this function's a callback, and what it's saying is, go get this connection to this database, and if you have other shit to do, go do it, and then it will, like this gentleman over here was saying, it will then trigger the next process when it's ready. And so we wrap all of this, because if I just did MongoDB or Mongo client connect and then did server start, there's a possibility that the DB would not be there when the server was started. And so we wrap this stuff in callbacks. And so this is just a callback here, where we've got the DB connection. If I've got an error, just throw it. And then what I'm doing is I'm just taking this DB and I'm setting it on the application, so that I'm passing the application around, and I can just get the DB from the application. And at this point, once the DB is there, then I'm going to initialize my pages controller and my posts controller. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to pass my DB object from index through the controller to the model. And that just ensures that it's going to be there at the model when I need it. And it's going to be the same one. And then same thing here, just but I've now moved this inside the callback for that DB connection, just to ensure that when my server is running, if my server is running, that also means that it has a database connection. My posts, posts basically, same thing here. You know, I've got my post model, but now I'm actually just initializing it down here with that app. Again, this is just sort of a pass through. And then the post model changed a lot. Not a lot, but fair amount. So now I've got this create post model. I grab the DB, and then I grab my post collection. This is just that you can create indexes on it, and that just ensures that that index exists. Now, the functions are all the same. I've got my all, my create, my get, my update, my destroy. But you notice that things are different now. I have posts find. Now, this is using that Mongo client. And then I'm sorting it by created at -1. And then I'm just turning it into an array. I've got callback. Well, what's callback? Callback actually comes from the outer function, which is what posts called. So now when I get posts, the first thing I do is I'm going to call my model all. And instead of just returning that or expecting it to return something, I've now switched to a callback interface. So instead of just having this equal something, I'm actually saying I'm passing in this function, which has an error in posts. And if we get an error, we're going to do a 404, even though it's actually probably not the right code. And then I'm doing the same render of my posts here, but I've sort of flipped it a little bit. So again, by the time I hit render, that means that this posts all has completed. I've gone to Mongo and sent my request. Mongo has given me the response, and I've turned that to an array, and I'm guaranteed at this point, line 12, I've either got an error or I've got a set of posts. How's that? Okay. The rest of these are all essentially the same. We've got post create. Well, post create actually doesn't return something, but for my GET request, same thing. I grab that post ID, and it's only once I've rendered edit, or once I've returned that information that I render. And so same thing with update. I'm doing the update, and I'm passing in this function, which is which then redirects, and the same thing with destroy. And then going through the model itself, most of these all have so create post. Insert is a method of the MongoDB client, and I'm just passing in the post, which is JSON for the new post, and I've got a callback, which is basically saying once you're done, here's that function. So does that sort of make sense? The controller is passing a callback function into the model that says when you're done getting data, pass that data back into this function, and that's that event system. So that's why, when we say it's an event-driven system, we're basically creating all these events with these callbacks so that the node process can, say, okay, you're going to go get something from MongoDB. I'm going to move on to the next thing, and then, just tell me when you're done. And, it'll tell the node process it's done, and it'll move on to the next thing until it gets to another blocking process or to another IO process. And if you do it right, you do it asynchronously, and you just provide a callback for that. Or a promise interface, but that's a different argument altogether. So that's basically persistence and async in 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
I'm going to charge you for 30 seconds.
All right, questions?
When you go live with this, how much of it has to be rekeyed into the production server, or can you just move it all via Git and be like, bye-bye?
Yeah, move it all via Git and be like bye-bye.
We'll do it right, and then move it.
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you can move it to production server and have it be wrong, but ideally you'd have written tests, and you will have a like a continuous testing server that has actually run all those tests and made sure that when you hit the post thing, it does the right thing, and so on and so forth. But
you're on port 3000, and they're all going to be on port 80. Like, how much of that stuff do you have to be like, oh, just kidding, port 80?
So 3000 is just the default that I set here. Typically in production systems, you'll actually have like different environments, and so when you're running your node in a production environment, you can set it to 80. Or actually, what I see more often is you'll actually run Nginx in front of Node, and Nginx essentially just acts as a quick proxy, because Nginx is really good at just passing stuff on, and so it listens on 80. And if it's legitimate, it will send it to 3000, and then it'll pass back to Nginx and back out. So yeah, I mean, and again, Express doesn't care. Express is sort of honey badger about it. You set it up however you and your DevOps person and whomever else wants. Anything else?
So you're in MongoDB, you run it the way it wants to, right?
I mean, so if I was running MongoDB, I mean, if I were doing this in production, I probably wouldn't be running it on localhost. I wouldn't be running it on the same machine. I'd probably have some other machine, or actually, going back out to not S3, but some system like that. I mean, whatever it is, whether it's another server, and that server will be responsible for keeping Mongo running and doing any sharding or distribution that it needs to do.
I thought you should run it on game.
Was that whole question just to?
Yes.
I should have known better. All right. Well, thank you so much. And if you have any questions that you didn't feel like asking in a big crowd, I'm around here till about 8:45. And what's that? Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out.
Hey, Eric.
Just a couple quick quick announcements before we stop. We did record this in a Hangout. However, there was some spotty internet going on, and the audio wasn't that great. And if you're on the Hangout or watching this later and want to complain about the audio, you should have shown up yourself. But we'll try to do that more often. If you guys can't make it, we'll try to do a Hangout and make it a little more professional. And next month, we have Gemma. What's her last name?
Endable.
And what's she talking about? Because David has my notes there.